Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Oh my, could those lyrics be any more appropriate today after what we just watched last night? And I'll be honest, listening to that tune, it's not as catchy and fun as usual because that was the reality of what we saw last night. Let's be real, we did find out last night that Joe Biden is a fan of the podcast. He gave us a little shout out. You heard it. He used the word clown like 5 times. What that tells me is that he's listening to the podcast, right? Unfortunately, it also tells us that he's probably the joker on the right. Anyway, wow, that was wild. I'll be real with you, listeners. I was planning on recording my reaction to the debate late last night. I was going to come into the studio about 10, 11 o'clock. I was so excited for the debate. I'd been kind of watching past debates all week long. I'd been prepping for this episode. I was ready for what I was going to talk about. And I was rocked by what we all witnessed. And to be honest, I felt a little bit of this responsibility because my whole platform over the last little bit with this podcast, right, has been trying to speak to the people that have turned the news off, that say politics isn't for me, I don't want to get involved in this, no thanks. And I'm trying to talk to that group that, hey, look, we realize that politics right now is toxic. We realize that the whole political climate is so divisive, it's so angry, it's so loud, but at the end of the day, you still have to be involved, you still have to be informed, and most people want to be. They feel they need to be. And then if you watched last night, you were completely just reminded of, oh, that's why I hate politics. That right there is why I don't watch the news. That's why I turn it off. That's why we don't bring up politics at the dinner table. That was disappointing in so many ways. And like I said, this mantle of responsibility, I think I've kind of felt now with this podcast. I had a lot of you reach out to me last night. And it didn't matter what side of the aisle you were on. It was all a very similar thought of what did we just watch? That was awful. And I'm not proud about anything we just saw. I particularly, watching the debate last night, was thinking about 2 different listeners. This came to my mind a few different times. The first listener I thought of is actually a listener and a guest on the podcast, Emily Northway. Episode 19. If you haven't listened to it, it's a fun interview. Emily's an American that's lived in Norway for the past 6 years. And we had this conversation about how the world, Europe specifically, views America and American politics and Donald Trump specifically. And she just said, everyone thinks it's a joke. They all care, they all watch, but people just don't take the US as seriously as they used to. And I was sitting there and, in our conversation, I was kind of rationalizing it. I was like, well, I understand that, but it's not as bad as you think. It's not as much of a joke as it might appear. The media definitely exaggerates, which they do. But I watched that last night thinking, oh my gosh, if I was sitting here watching that debate with Emily and her Norwegian friends, I'd have nothing to say. I'd say, yeah, you're right. This is a joke. You're right. This is embarrassing. And while I'm proud to be an American, always, that will never go away for me personally, I am not proud of what product we are showing to the nation and to the world right now. If that 96 minutes represents our political discourse, if that represents good people trying to make progress in our country, if that is the greatest country in the world showing what we're going to do and what the future brings, we have some serious work to do. Listener 2 that I thought about. If I were to start a fan club for Millennial in the Middle, I think Melissa would be like the chairman of that board. Melissa's awesome. She's been a fan from the beginning. She messages me after every episode. She shares it with all her friends. And I was talking with her yesterday before the event happened, and she was actually screenshotting some conversations she had had with her friends that she'd shared a couple episodes with and their banter back and forth. And we were talking about expectations for the debate tonight. And then she said to me, I'm trying to think of the most American meal I can because I'm going to have this fun night with my kids. She's got like 3 or 4 little kids, not too old. I don't know how old your kids are now, Melissa. They're probably anywhere from 3 to 15. And she says, I'm going to watch the debate with them. It's going to be so fun. And I thought about her a few different times during the debate last night thinking, I wonder how that American meal and family watch party of this madness is going. I can see her kids saying to her mom, like, what is going on? And what's the answer? I don't know what you would even say to her in response to that, or say in response to your kids. Like, I don't know. This isn't how politics has always been. This isn't how it always is, but unfortunately it is right now. So listen. I understand if last night made you think, I'm done. This is lame. I'm out of here. I can't handle it. I took 2 Excedrin and I'm going to forget 2020 happened. Maybe you need something stronger than Excedrin. But here's what I would say. To me, my takeaway was both the candidates made the decision for the voter difficult. It doesn't have to be that difficult. But rather than telling you, here's what matters, here's what you should vote on, and here's why you should vote for me specifically, that didn't happen. So what now has happened is America has to go back to the drawing board. We have to take in all this madness. We've got to decide what matters the very most to us. It's going to require a lot of critical thinking, and we've got to figure it out. It's our only choice. It would be really easy to just not do a reaction on this episode. It would be really easy to just pretend like that never happened. And I have a fly in my podcast studio and it's driving me nuts right now. I tried for like 10 minutes before I recorded to kill it and I wasn't able to, so I'm sorry. But we're here. Here's what I want to talk about. By the way, I've got some of you that are maybe saying, oh, Connor, you seem a little mad today. Isn't the rules of the podcast that no need to get angry or raise our voice? I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. We've all heard that from our mom or dad or someone we love. And you say that to kids, right? Like, Mom, I'm sorry. Are you mad at me? I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. And frankly, that's how I feel today. Because the loser of last night was the voters. The loser was democracy. The loser was civil discourse. The loser was progress and change. And then I'm going to argue here in a bit how I think the loser was Trump. Now, that doesn't mean Joe Biden was the winner. I don't think Joe Biden won that debate. I don't think anything as far as a winner came out of last night. But I think Trump was more of a loser than Biden. I'm going to explain to you why. But before we jump into the specifics of last night's debate, here's how I want to do this. I spent the week studying presidential debates. They fascinate me. I love the strategy behind presidential debates, behind politics in general. I mean, frankly, I love the art of politics. I always have. It fascinates me. And so I want to talk a little bit today about the history of the presidential debates, and I'm going to talk about the very first presidential debate. And how we're going to end up doing it now is we're going to see what they did right back then, and we're going to see kind of what happened and what went wrong last night. There were lots of things that went wrong. Not only was the event just a circus, but it was just done poorly. The format was awful. The moderator was awful. Trump's strategy was so bad, and Biden was not able to capitalize. We're going to talk about it. And rather than just say, oh, that was a mess, I'm going to tell you a little bit why I think it was a mess. And we're going to get specific in like, here's exactly what went wrong. And here's what was missing tonight that we've seen in previous debates. It's hard to put a finger on, but I think you'll see what it is we go through tonight. So the first ever presidential debate that was recorded and televised was in 1960. Now, the 1960 presidential election is very interesting to me because the two candidates are two very, very famous, ultimately went on to be U.S. presidents, John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon. Now, at the time, Richard Nixon had been the vice president for Dwight D. Eisenhower for 2 terms. He'd been the vice president for 8 years, was pretty popular, was very skilled, was a good orator. He was a politician at his heart. Then you had a young, upstart, first-term senator who is charismatic, who is probably the best-looking president we have ever had, and someone that America fell in love with, John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy's rise to becoming president is kind of similar to Barack Obama's in a lot of ways. Kennedy's slogan, his campaign slogan for the 1960 election was leadership for the 60s. You've probably seen the old school picture of him, leadership for the 60s, Kennedy's. This was a very, very intense and a very close election and a very good campaign. So all summer long, the two of them are out on the trail. They're campaigning, they're lobbying for votes, they're trying to tell you why you should vote for them. And they come up with this idea that, hey, for the first time, we're going to have the two candidates from the major political parties actually show up in a televised debate and talk policy, talk vision, talk platform. So that's what they did. Now, 1960, it wasn't like everything was going great in 1960. It's easy to look at 2020 now and be like, oh, well, the reason that politics is so divisive or the reason that we're so angry at each other is just because we got coronavirus going on. We got this civil rights, the largest call for civil rights since the 60s in the Black Lives Matter movement. We've got global warming. I mean, all these crises, well, they didn't have it easy either. Let's do a little recap of what people were talking about in 1960. We're in the middle of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. They had just taken the lead in the space race by sending the Sputnik satellite into orbit. You'd suddenly had the rise of Fidel Castro and his communist regime, leading to this whole fear of the spread of communism into the Western Hemisphere. It felt like this value-based, the stake of our nation, just like our inherent core is at stake here. And on the domestic front, the struggle for civil rights is just kind of kicking up. Desegregation has started to divide the nation. And there's some major questions going on just about the state of democracy in the United States. And it was very, very clear that we needed a strong leader. So these two show up. Now, some of the details of this debate are very, very interesting. They show up at the debate, and no one really knew how important this was going to be. 70 million Americans ended up tuning in and watching this debate. This had never happened before. And suddenly, there had been presidential candidates that had debated before, and people got out and campaigned, and there were presidents that had gone on TV and given speeches. But this was the first time that an election was brought into the living room of Americans, that you could see them, that you could feel what they were saying, that you could start to decide for yourself. And the nation really took advantage and cherished this opportunity to see the candidates up close and personal. Well, JFK took this debate a lot more seriously than Nixon did. In fact, Nixon took 3 days off prior to the debate, holed up in a hotel, doing debate prep, and literally sitting out by the pool. Now, why was he sitting out by the pool? To keep that Kennedy suntan nice and ready to be on TV. We're now going to have that juxtaposed with Richard Nixon, who was working himself like a dog out on the campaign trail. He had just gotten over the flu, and so he'd been sick, but he kept campaigning, kept working through it, and was actually running a low fever on debate night. And rather than taking it easy, he went and held a couple campaign events the day of the debate and showed up like an hour after Kennedy had, already there, already ready to go. In fact, the director of this first debate invited both of them to kind of this prep session to get ready for the debate, to get going, and Kennedy came, Nixon no-showed. He didn't even come. He set himself up to where he was like, no, it's fine. I know how to do this. I've done this before. Another little interesting side bit that the director of this was a 38-year-old producer named Don Hewitt who managed this whole event, and he actually became the creator of 60 Minutes for CBS, which is still on today. So obviously this had a huge feel of importance for our nation. So Nixon shows up for the debate. Nixon had also injured his knee earlier on in the campaign season. And as luck would have it, as he was getting out of his car to walk into the recording studio that they were going to host the debate, he drills his knee on the car door when it opens, re-injures himself. So think about this. He's been sick. He's running a fever. He re-injures his knee. And now he's supposed to go out and have this most crucial moment, this most crucial debate. Then this last piece of history is so interesting to me. The TV producers, basically those on set, they had a makeup artist that was there to help the candidates that were about to be on TV. And they asked both of them together, do you guys want makeup? JFK answers first. Here's a little bit of strategy that comes in here. And JFK kind of gives this look of, well, I'm a man. I don't wear makeup. I'll pass on the makeup. So what does Richard Nixon do? Oh, well, I don't need makeup either. I'm fine. He passes. So neither of them wear makeup. But here's what Nixon didn't know. JFK had his own team ready to powder his nose and put makeup on. So he was ready to look ready for live TV, ready to look good. He shows up on camera, and JFK got that last-minute touch-up right before they went on camera, and Nixon doesn't. And everyone that watched the debate said Nixon looked sick. He was profusely sweating in a visible way. He wore a gray suit that blended in with the background on these black and white TVs, and there was just this major contrast of this good-looking, young, suntanned, healthy senator who is a great speaker with this kind of old, sick-looking guy that looks uncomfortable, is sweaty, and looks a little worn out and tired. Now, here's what's so fascinating about this debate. In 1960, not everyone had TVs yet. A TV set in your house wasn't commonplace for everyone. There were still a lot of people that relied on the radio. People that listened to the debate on the radio, most of them said, a majority polled, said that Nixon won the debate, or that it was very close. And if you go back and look at the debate, policy-wise, they both performed fantastically. It was pretty dead even. But for those that watched the event on TV, JFK won in a landslide. What was interesting is JFK went into that debate down 6 points in the national polls. The day after that debate, JFK actually had a 1 to 2 point lead. The power of these debates and how that started to shape our American history. In fact, to prove this even further of the importance of looks and how this was, the two running mates after the first date. So Nixon's running mate was Henry Cabot Lodge, and he had a few choice words for his presidential candidate at the end. He actually said, "That son of a bitch just lost us the election." He repeatedly said that over and over in the week after that debate, and he watched it on TV. Now, JFK's running mate was Lyndon B. Johnson, who would also become president after JFK was assassinated. Johnson listened to the debate on the radio and said publicly that he thought Nixon won the debate clearly. Isn't that fascinating? Now, why do I bring that up to you? Most people don't follow the ins and outs of the campaign trail. They don't follow the news and all the individual specific policies and things that happen. But when that big event happens, that's when people tune in. They did it 60 years ago, and they're doing it again now. And really, the most important part of these debates is the first 30 minutes of the first debate. Because that's when America, for the first time, gets to see these two candidates face off. So let's talk about the first 30 minutes. Here's my problem with last night. Last night totally started on the wrong foot. Now, I understand that we're in the middle of coronavirus, that they agreed beforehand to not shake hands. But the start of that debate was so awkward. It was so forced. They both seemed so nervous, in my opinion. It looked just like this stressful, anxious situation. And there wasn't any bit of humanity. There's a reason why at the start of these debates, the two candidates walk out to applause, they shake hands, they pat each other on the back, and they walk to their individual lecterns, and they start. Last night, they both just kind of wander weirdly out to their podiums from different sides of the stage. Joe gives a thumbs up to Donald, and Donald gives him a And then, this is where Chris Wallace messed up. Last night, there was not an opportunity for an opening statement. I can't underestimate the importance of that. Here's how every presidential debate should start. All right, candidates, you have 3 minutes, and you have 3 minutes to both tell us why you're running for president and why we should vote for you. Donald, you're first. That's what people are tuning in to listen to. We want to hear you sum up everything that you stand for, everything that you run for, quickly, concisely, and I want to see as a voter if I can connect with you. If you are doing something to compel me to either like you or like what you stand for and ultimately want to vote for you. Instead, they both walk out on stage, and then Chris Wallace explains the format for the debate, which was so dumb. I'll talk about it in just a minute. And then says, let's talk about the Supreme Court. Donald Trump, you say this. Biden says this. Go. And let the circus begin. I actually want to contrast this with this 1960 debate. This is going to be kind of cool. I'm going to play a little clip from it. And so both Nixon and Kennedy come on screen. They both are given 2 minutes for their opening statement. And then this is the first question. It's posed to JFK, and his answer right here, to me, does such an amazing job at speaking to the voter, telling you what's important and what you should focus on. Check this out.
Senator, the Vice President in his campaign has said that you are naive and at times immature. He has raised the question of leadership. On this issue, why do you think people should vote for you rather than the Vice President?
Well, the Vice President and I came to the Congress together. 1946, we both served in the Labor Committee. I've been there now for 14 years, the same period of time that he has. So that our experience in government is comparable. Secondly, I think the question is, what are the programs that we advocate? What is the party record that we lead? I come out of the Democratic Party, which in this century has produced Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, and which supported and sustained these programs which I've discussed tonight. Mr. Nixon comes out of the Republican Party. He was nominated by it. And it is a fact that through most of these last 25 years, the Republican leadership has opposed federal aid for education, medical care for the aged, development of the Tennessee Valley, development of our natural resources. I think Mr. Nixon is an effective leader of his party. I hope he would grant me the same. The question before us is, which point of view and which party do we want to lead the United States?
Mr. Nixon, would you like to comment on that statement?
I have no comment.
I love that answer Kennedy gives. One, he stays civil. He basically says, I think we're both good leaders, and I think Nixon would agree too. But here's the real question. The real question is a principled matter. Do you want this mentality to lead our nation, or do you want this mentality to lead our nation? That sets the tone for the debate. And then both of them can now go off talking about the difference in principles, the differences in ideas. And what is sad to me right now is as I look at the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, their platforms right now are very, very different. The direction that both parties feel the country should be headed is very different. And honestly, that's kind of unique Because a lot of times the parties, agree on general values or generic things, but there's different like policy issues in how they want to handle things that they differ. Right now, I feel like there is a complete different, just value-based difference between the two parties. And what's a bummer is neither of these men are able to articulate that. Or maybe they are, but they at least weren't last night. And that's why I feel kind of bummed out as a millennial in the middle right now. That's why I was so disappointed, because we could have an amazing discussion for 90 minutes about the direction of our country, of philosophies, of values, of practices, and how we're going to move the nation forward, but that just doesn't happen. Now, am I surprised by that? No. Well, I think we knew that was going to happen. But I think there's a big difference there. Now, I'm going to talk here quickly. I honestly don't want to spend that much time talking about this debate because it was a circus. I think we agree on that. But there are a few things that I think could have some missed opportunities that I think both of them had that I want to point out. And to me, what you saw, if you watched that clip on YouTube right now, you saw JFK look directly into the camera and speak. This lesson that was learned in 1960, obviously Trump missed in 2020. If you watched the presidential debate in 1960, you saw two very different approaches from the two candidates and how they spoke. John F. Kennedy, the entire time, spoke to the camera. He spoke to the American people. He pointed right at you. It was like he was reaching out through the television saying why you should vote for me and trying to connect with a voter at home. Richard Nixon, on the other hand, spoke to Kennedy and he talked to the moderators. Well, what happens is you're watching that on TV is you watch Richard Nixon go from moderator to Kennedy. His eyes are all over the place and his eyes are never talking to you. What I think both of these candidates missed last night, now Biden talked into the camera a lot more than Trump did, is that, look, this debate, we're not trying to convince each other. There were 100 people in that audience, and most of them were your family members or people that had friends or some personal connection. So you're not trying to win them over. You're trying to win over us at home. And I think why I was so disappointed last night, specifically in Trump, was I feel like Donald got up on stage last night and forgot what his purpose there was. Your purpose is to connect with the people, to tell us why you should vote for them. And all of that was lost. There was so much energy spent in this argument between Chris Wallace, the moderator, who could care we care less about, right? And Biden, that it was like we were just spectators in this old man circus, the jokers and the clowns. And we're all sitting going, can we turn this off? I'm not a part of this. And here's where I think there were missed opportunities. I think at any point last night, if Joe Biden would have made a comment like this, he could have had like a mic drop moment. During a time, which there were many, when Trump was, interrupting, yelling, arguing with Chris, whatever it was going to be. If Biden stopped for just a second and said something like, America, that guy right there is the president of the United States. If that doesn't sit well with you, you can change that next month. A comment like that would have been an ultimate mic drop, because as you're watching, Trump was not presidential last night. Trump's embarrassing to say that's the leader of our president last night. That's what people at home were thinking. But if Biden could have, in a civilized, strong way, just pointed that out, I think he sways a lot of people to his side. Instead, he tells the guy, oh, shut up. Oh, come on. Oh, you clown. And he calls him a clown 6 times because he's a podcast fan. He missed an opportunity there. Now, Trump. Here is where I think the opportunity was missed. What made Trump such an effective politician, like him or not, in 2016 we talked about this in the episode with Patrick Henry Hansen in number 17, is his ability to simplify, is his ability to take all these complex topics and heated discussions and break them down to very simple points. He did it so well in 2016. If you think about what he did in 2016, what was his platform? That you were going to make America great again. And how was he going to do that? He was going to do that by putting America first. He was going to build the wall. He was going to drain the swamp. He was this outsider coming in, was going to drain the swamp and get rid of all of them. And what did he feel about his opponent? Well, lock her up. She's a Washington insider that's corrupt. You should lock her up. That is the Trump campaign in 2016 in a nutshell. And you notice that almost every single one of those things can either be put on a hat or chanted. What in the Trump campaign right now is simple? What is the message? What's your argument against Joe? Is it that he's Sleepy Joe? Or is it that he's a Trojan horse coming in from the left that's a radical socialist fascist that's going to take us all by surprise? What's the argument? Simply, why should I vote for you? And it's crazy to me. And I think this is where the disappointment came, because I honestly have argued for a long time that, like him or not, Donald Trump has been a very skilled and effective politician. He's done things in no way like anyone has ever done them before, but it worked. It was effective. It got the job done. He won. What put him in office in 2016, I feel like he's searching for right now. Now, here's the danger of that. Joe Biden wasn't impressive last night. I think Joe Biden was less of a loser than Donald Trump. I think Joe Biden was coached to not get upset, not yell. And I actually think he did a pretty good job. I think Donald Trump obviously came in very aggressively to ruffle his feathers, to rile him up and get him caught off guard. I thought, to be honest, that Joe held his composure pretty well. But that was extremely, extremely difficult to try and maintain your composure in a setting that has zero composure. Biden, at the end of the day, wasn't able to communicate either why you should vote for him. I didn't hear at the end of the day what the real argument was or the stance was, other than this guy's a clown and we got to get him out of there. Now, I did, at the end of the day, think that Trump was more of a loser than Biden here, like I just said, and here's why. I don't think there was probably many people who had their minds changed after last night. I do think there are probably more people that are not going to vote. I think if someone is maybe doesn't care that much and they weren't going to vote and they watched last night and they tuned in for 20 minutes and turned it off and screw that. I do think there will be more people that don't vote. So who loses there? Democracy. But the people that I think Trump lost last night, which I actually think is a pretty big group in our nation, are those that don't agree with the ideals of the Democratic Party, that struggle convincing themselves to go with what the Democratic Party is and the direction that they're heading right now, but they really have a hard time liking Trump. They can't really handle that thought of writing Trump's name down. If you're in that boat where you don't agree with the Democratic Party, but you struggle liking Trump, I think Trump reinforced last night that need of I really struggle voting for that guy or thinking of him as my president. So do those people vote for Biden now? I don't know. Do they find some third-party candidate that they write down so they'll never vote for Trump? Maybe. Or maybe they don't vote at all. But I think that potentially is the only way last night that things were really moved. So, all right, I've been really negative up to this point in the podcast. Last night was full of negativity. And I made the promise to you that in this podcast that I hope you leave feeling better. I hope you leave feeling like uplifted in some sense of, you gained something from it. If anything, hopefully from this episode, you gained from the story about Nixon and Kennedy, and you can tell that now. And you can learn that, hey, if you ever go on a presidential debate, make sure you say yes to the makeup man, take a couple days off the campaign trail, and go sit out by the pool and get some sun. Maybe that's your takeaway. But here's the message I want to leave you with. It's really easy after last night to say, I don't connect with these guys. I hate politics. This is a joke. This is why I don't follow. I'm going to turn off the news. I really don't care. It's easy to do that. But I'd remind you a couple things. One, fortunately, we live in a society where the president is just one person. That the president leads one branch of 3 branches of our government. That luckily checks and balances have been put in place so the president at the end of the day, frankly, doesn't have all that much power. That maybe should set your mind at ease a little bit tonight. The other thing I would tell you is this. Ultimately, what happened after watching that debate last night is neither candidate made your decision easy. It's going to require some critical thinking. And you know what? That's okay, because that's what my listeners on this podcast do. So here's my advice to you. You know what these politicians, you know what Biden and Trump's stances are. You know how they feel about things. Try to look less at who did a better job at the debate, whose personality is better, who do you like more, because we're not worrying about these debates moving forward. Try to ask yourself this: what values matter most to me? What policies do I care most about? And which candidate do I agree with their way of thinking the most? I think probably the 2 biggest voting issues on either side right now is, if you're going to vote for Trump, where you land on that is, I think, his argument on the Supreme Court and the values that we place in the Supreme Court and the judges that he, has appointed or will continue to appoint if he continues to be the president, like you talked about. And I think if you're going to end on the Biden side, I think, frankly, it's going to come down to race. I think Donald Trump's refusal to denounce white supremacist groups yesterday was kind of baffling to me. He didn't answer the question directly, and he very easily could have just said, yes, white supremacists that are openly racist out there spreading violence, stop. Now, that doesn't take anything away from Antifa. You stop too. Knock it off. You could have very easily said, both of those extreme sides need to knock it off. But he didn't. And I've talked to a lot of my followers that is like, they're like, because of that right there, I cannot vote for Trump. And I can't argue with that. That's where you lie. If that's where you feel, then hey, there where you go. That's not where I'm saying those are the 2 most important things. I'm saying those are 2 things that I've heard a lot from you as listeners. You've got to decide. This podcast isn't here to tell you what to do. I'm sorry you had to watch all that. I was disappointed. Not mad, but I was disappointed. What I want to leave you with is this. Ronald Reagan, an amazing debater in 1980, and frankly, an amazing president. He finished his closing statement in the 1980 debate with words that have now echoed through American culture. This is something that we point out as like, man, this is how a debate should be done. Let's get a little nostalgic here and listen to this last 60 seconds of what Ronald Reagan says is his closing statement in the final debate just a week before the election in 1980.
Next Tuesday, all of you will go to the polls. You'll stand there in the polling place and make a decision. I think when you make that decision, it might be well if you would ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago? Is there more or less unemployment in the country than there was 4 years ago? Is America as respected throughout the world as it was? Do you feel that our security is as safe, that we're as strong as we were 4 years ago? And if you answer all of those questions yes, why then I think your choice is very obvious as to who you'll vote for. If you don't agree, if you don't think that this course that we've been on for the last 4 years is what you would like to see us follow for the next 4, then I could suggest another choice that you have.
Now that is how a leader speaks. That is a leader that connects with people and makes you excited to vote for him. Would I make the same argument today? I think you could make the same argument about the 4 years comment to Trump, but I think that has to have a major asterisk. The critical thinking is coronavirus, unprecedented. This has never happened before. You know, when Biden said last night, Trump shut down the economy, to use Joe's words, come on, man. Anyway, I'm done. That's enough for today. Thank you for listening. Next week is the VP debate. Watch that debate because I actually have really high hopes that there will be some policy talked about, that there will be platforms, and that you can help do the last thing I just talked about in that way. And I'll be responding to that next week. And I've got a little surprise I'll tell you about a little bit later too. Thanks for listening, and I feel like this is extremely appropriate. Let's sing it with a little vigor today. Clowns to the left me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you. See you next time.
Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in